Hi guys, and welcome to lesson 15, and today we're going to be looking at writing fractions as decimals. Now let's start with our in focus task. You can see it up here on the left, and we are being asked, how do we write these fractions as decimals? Now you can see that there are three different number cards. The first one is showing the fraction of a half. The second one is showing a fraction of a quarter, and the third one is showing a fraction of 3/4. Now, before we move on, I wanted to just refresh your memory of these wonderful apparatus that you'll see here in the top right-hand corner that we use in school often. You'll probably remember that these are called Deans. And down here in the bottom right, this is what we'd call a 100 square. Now, I've also basically put an image of what the 100 square would look like as a two-dimensional object. So we're going to be using this today to help us work out how we're going to write these fractions as a decimal. So let's start off with the first fraction. We've been asked how do we write this fraction as a decimal. We're going to be looking at the fraction of 1/2. Now, in your mind, I'd like for you to think about me colouring in half of this black and white 100 square. Now, it's going to be really messy with my pen on here, so I do apologise. So we know we've got one row of 10 at the top, and then we've got 20, 30, 40, 50 squares. So half of this 100 square has now been coloured in. But how do we write that as a decimal? Let's move on to the next slide to see if we can learn some more. So just like I did on the previous 100 square, you can also see for question 1 on this Let's Learn question that half of this 100 square has been shaded in a dark green colour. Now, although it hasn't got all the little extra squares, we know that each row is actually 10 squares. We know that they've been split into tenths. However, because we've had 5 of those tens rows shaded in, we know that 5 tenths have been shaded in. Now, we've been working really hard for this unit, and I'm hoping that you'll be able to imagine that place value chart in your mind, and you'll be able to realise that we would then write 5 tenths as a decimal of 0.5, and you can just see I've drawn that on top to help you. Now let's have a look at the second method, because we might not always have the option of colouring something in, or of course, like we're not in school at the moment, we can't use those actual Dean's apparatus. So we're going to have to think of an alternative number sentence method to figure this out. So casting your minds back to our fractions unit, remember the top numbers are known as the numerators, and the bottom numbers, the numbers down below, are known as the denominators. So we're going to be having to multiply the numerator and the denominator by the same number. So we've just shaded in 5 tenths. So we're going to be multiplying both the numerator and the denominator by 5. So let's give that a go. 1 times 5 is going to give us 5, and then 2 times 5 is going to give us 10. So we've also worked out that we've been almost doing equivalent fractions again. So we know that 1/2 is equal to 5 tenths, and we've been working so hard that we also know that we would write 5 tenths as a decimal of 0.5. Let's keep going on, and I'm sure it will make even more sense, so click along. So we've just worked out how we would write 1/2 as a decimal. So we're going to be moving on to the second card on the in focus task, and that is 1/4. So thinking of method 1, you can see here that we have got another 100 square, and we have got a quarter of that actual square shaded in. Now it's hard to see because I've got this highlighter pen. Let me switch back to the red so you can see it. So we can see that half of the 100 square would be just like we did before in the first question, and therefore a quarter would be here. So we therefore know that 1/4 of this 100 square would give us 25 hundredths. Yep, because there are 25 of these little squares, and we know that each of these little squares are hundredths. Now we would write 25 hundredths just as we always have, thinking of our place value chart, we would write it as 0.25. Now, method 2, as we've been working out, is slightly different. We'd be having to multiply the numerator, the top number, and the denominator, the number down below, by the same number. So in this case, we're going to be multiplying both those numbers by 25. So let's give that a go. 1 times 25 is going to give us 25, and then 4 times 25 is going to give us 100. So we have now worked out down here that 1/4 is equivalent to 25 hundredths. And we've also been working super hard, and we know that we write 25 hundredths as 0.25 as a decimal. So I can now tick this one off too. We have worked out 1/4 fraction as written as a decimal. Let's click along to do the third in focus card together. The third and final card on the in focus task, as you can see up here, is 3/4. So we're going to be figuring out how we're going to write 3/4 as a decimal. So using method 1 and the 100 square, you'll be able to see here that if I were to split that 100 square in half, and then I'll do it into quarters, we can see that now 3/4 of that 100 square has been shaded in dark green. And if we counted them all together, because we've already learned that each of those quarters is 25, we know that altogether 75 hundredths have been shaded in. So we can see that that is 3/4. Now we would write 75 hundredths as a decimal as 0.75, which you can see here at the bottom. Excuse me. Now, method 2 is also using our multiplication knowledge. Sorry, I've got a tickly throat there, I apologise. So you can see here that we've got the fraction 3/4, and we are going to be dealing with multiplying by 25, because we know that each of those quarters are going to be 25 hundredth squares, as we worked out over here. So let's do our multiplication. 3 times 75 is going to give us what? Brilliant, it's going to give us 75. And we then know that we're going to do the same with the denominator and multiply 4 by 25, giving us 100. So we've just successfully worked out that 3/4 is equivalent to 75 hundredths. And as a decimal, we would write that as 0.75. Now you've just seen two different methods. It's up to you as to which method you feel more confident with. If you feel confident with just method 1, that's absolutely fine with me. Or if you prefer method 2 or both, it's completely your choice, but you've got to start figuring out what works best for you. Right, let's click along and do some more work around this. So in the Maths No Problem textbook, which I know you can't see, there was also a fourth question to that original in focus task. So please have a look. So question 4 is asking us to fill in some of these missing boxes, and we're going to be using these 3 large squares below to help us. So square number 1, we can see that half of it has been shaded in, and we need to now find the equivalent in 10. So let's look at this second square. We can see that we've got 1 row, 2 rows, 3 rows, 4 rows, and 5 rows of 10. And we can then see that 1/2 is also equivalent to 5/10. And we also know that we would write that as 0.5 as a decimal, because we've been working really hard on that. Now let's think about that equivalent of tenths in hundreds. So we're going to need to look at the third row now, sorry, the third shape now. So this third shape has got a lot more squares in it. So we know that each of these squares, in each row there's 10 of them. So if you look, half of this 100 square has been shaded in. So we know that each row has got 10 squares in it. So half would mean 50 squares have been shaded in, but we know that's 50 hundredths. So that's all of these guys up here at the top. And we would know that 50 hundredths would be written as 0.50 as a decimal, because as always, we've been working super hard on that. So please remember that sometimes you've got to look very carefully at how the 100 square figures have been shaded in. Is it just one big half block? Is it in rows of with 5 cut into them, or is it little squares of 10? That might be able to help you for some of the next tasks we're doing. So let's move on. Okay, so guided practice is basically similar to what we've been doing. So let's start. Question 1 is saying 1/2 can be written as tenths. Now we're going to have to try and recall what we've just worked out. You can almost imagine we've got our wonderful 100 square, which I'm going to kind of draw up here. And we know that 1/2 is also the same as how many tenths. You might be able to remember. Brilliant, guys. It would be the same as 5/10. Now we would also write 5/10 as a decimal. What would that be? Brilliant, that would be 0.5. Now this second part of guided practice is a little bit different because we're having to remember everything about equivalent fractions and even the fraction rules. So instead of working with 1/2, I want you to now think about 1/5. 1/5 is going to be equivalent to how many tenths? Now let's say if I had a bar model, again this is going to be quite wonky, so I do apologize. It's really hard to draw on this. So if I've got a bar that has been split into 5 equal parts, okay, we know that 1/5, which I'm just going to colour in here, has been shown. Now we need to find the equivalent in tenths. So let me now split my second bar below into tenths. Okay, again it's going to take a little bit of time, so just bear with me, guys. Now if I needed to then find the equivalent of 1/5, we can see that it's actually going to be equivalent to 2/10. Brilliant. So 2/10 would also be written as 0.2. Now, if you need to draw something like this, then that's fine. But also look at the numbers in the top number sentence and the numbers in the bottom number sentence here. They've practically been jiggled around, and the numerators and denominators have been multiplied by different numbers. So we can see at the top here that 1 has been multiplied by 5, and the denominator below has been multiplied by 5 as well. But here we're using a different multiplication. Can you spot it? Brilliant. This numerator is being multiplied by 2 and this denominator is being multiplied by 2 as well. So we've got those two different methods. Don't worry if it looks a bit confusing. Please click on and we're going to continue to crack on with this. Well done. Question 2 of guided practice is also reminiscent of what we did in our in focus task with the different cards. So question 2 is saying 1/4 and 3/4 can be written as hundredths. Let's see if we can work it out. So we had originally used two methods for this. You might have recalled the 100 squares that had been coloured in the dark green. So let's think about 1/4 of it. We know that 1/4 is the same as 25 hundredths, and that means that the numerator has been multiplied by 25, and we know that the denominator has been multiplied by 25 as well. So we know that 1/4 is the same as 25 hundredths, and we would write that as a decimal of 0.25. Now I don't, as I said, have the 100 square on there, but let's just think if we had 1 whole 100 square, we know that half of it would be 50, and then we know that 1/4 would be 25. So we know that there are 25 hundredths there. Brilliant. What about 3/4? If we know that each of these quarters are 25, we then know that 3 of those quarters is going to be, brilliant, it's going to be 75 hundredths. So we're, just like we did, we're going to go 3 times 25, that gives us 75, and then the same with the denominator, 4 times 25 is going to give us 100. So we know that 3/4 is equivalent to 75 hundredths, and we would write that as a decimal of 0.75. Right, let's click on. This is the third question of guided practice, and it is a little bit tricky, so please listen carefully so you know what we have to do. Question 3 is asking, write each quantity in decimals. Now we have been doing a lot of this, but we haven't really done that with fractions. So you're going to have to maybe think back and remember how we would write those fractions as a decimal. So let me start by helping you with question A. How are we going to write 1 3/4 meters as a decimal? So let me get my little place value kind of chart drawn up here. That might be able to help us. I'm just drawing it above, so please just hold tight. So we know that we've got 1, and that's 1 whole, so that's 1, and it's going to go under the O for the ones column, and we've also got the decimal. Now 3/4, some people might be tempted to write 3/4, so it'd be 1.34. However, we're not dealing with that in tenths and hundreds. You've got to convert this 3/4 as tenths or hundreds. So think back to our 100 square. How many hundredths is 3/4? If I had that wonderful 100 square, well, that looks more like a house, but you know what I mean, guys. And I've split that into quarters. How many do each of those quarters represent? We've learned that each quarter is 25 hundredths, so 3/4 would be, brilliant, 75 hundredths. Now, in a moment, I'd like for you to pause this video and I'd like for you to work out independently questions B and C of this third task of guided practice, and then click on to the next slide to get the answers. Best of luck. We previously worked out together, looking at question 3A, that 1 3/4 meters would be written as 1.75 as a decimal. But please remember, because each of these units of measurements are different, please include them. So question A was dealing with meters, so therefore we have to remember our meters unit of measurement. Let's move on to question B. So we were told that 8.5 kilograms can be written as a decimal. Now we've got the 8 here, yep, in the ones column. Now the thing is, we need to convert a half. Now we should be able to remember from our 100 square that if we're talking about tenths, remember we had the whole top part shaded in and each of these were in different tenths. So we know that 5/10 were there. So we can say that 5/10 had been shaded in. So that's also the same as a half. And we know that we would then write that as 0.5 for 5/10. But remember, we don't have just 1/2, we've got 8.5. So we would write that as 8.5 kilograms. And don't forget, as I said, your unit of measurements of kilograms. Last but not least, question C, we've got £5.25. Now, just like we've been doing in our 100 square, we know first of all, we're dealing with money, that in each pound there is 100 pennies. So let's pretend that is also represented as 100 square. And if we've got that 100 square, we've split it into quarters. We know that each quarter is equal to 25 hundredths, and that would be written as 0.25. However, we've also got this £5. So £5.25 would be written as £5.25, and you can see that here in the bottom decimal. Right, I know it is a bit tricky because you don't have all these 100 squares and apparatus and things at home, but please try your best and just keep on rewinding the video to different parts to help you if needed. We'd like for you now to go to your 4B workbooks, and can you complete the worksheets for lesson 15 on pages 29 and 30, not forgetting the date and to show all your workings out. Best of luck, year 4, can't wait to see how it goes.